Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Making Business Personal. I'm Jason Weiss. Now, I'm sorry to disappoint some of you right off the bat who are expecting my interview with Ty Tyler of Shock the Fox Guitars, because that was supposed to be this. But unfortunately, the audio, ironically, of a guy who specializes in sonic perfection, uh, was wonky. It just came out bad. I've had people listen to it, I've had people analyze it, and it just doesn't look like it's fixable. So I'm going to have to re-interview Ty so that we can get this thing going. But I've got something else for you today. And it's something I was going to talk about next week, but I figured why not just do it now? So here's the thing. You can be honest with people without being a jerk about it. Did you know that? You can be candid without making people feel like crap. And you can tell the truth without being brutal. You see, somewhere along the line, we managed to confuse authenticity with a free pass for being an asshole. And now, look, I don't curse much on this show, but sometimes you just got to call it what it is. A lot of people walk around and they say things like, hey, look, this is just who I am, or I'm being authentic, or you know what? I don't sugarcoat things. And it's as if saying those things just gives them permission to destroy another human being. But I've got news for you. That's not authenticity. And that is not powerful leadership. That's just plain laziness. And it's getting a lot worse. Look, we've got Gen Z coming into the workplace, and they are demanding psychological safety, and they're right to demand that. But we've also got seasoned leaders who think vulnerability is weakness. They think that kindness is being soft. We've got remote work that makes every single conversation feel more intense because it's really hard to read body language through a screen. And there's a lot of times when people don't even turn their cameras on. And lately, there's been this obsession with being radically candid. And that's giving people permission to be radically cruel. And meanwhile, everyone's walking around either terrified to say what needs to be said, or they're saying it in ways that just destroy trust, that kill innovation, or that hemorrhage talent. Well, I'm calling all that out because it's just a bunch of crap. I've spent the last 15 years working with leaders who think that they have to choose between being direct or being decent, between getting results or keeping relationships, between being strong or being kind. And every single one of those binary choices is just wrong. So I'm going to show you something today about how the most powerful leaders that I know communicate. They're not the loudest people in the room, and they're certainly not the most brutal ones, but they are the most effective ones. So if you think being clear means being cruel, you're not just hurting your people, you're sabotaging your own success. So let's dive in. Let me paint you a picture. And it's probably happening in your organization somewhere right now. There's this one leader, okay? Let's call him the authentic asshole. Hey, why stop now, right? You know the type though, right? He says things like, hey man, I'm just being real with you, right before he destroys someone's confidence. He uses phrases like, look, I don't have time to sugarcoat things, or this generation, they're just so sensitive. Oh, and then there's my personal favorite. I'm not here to make friends. So when someone gets hurt by this guy's delivery, he's like, hey, I'm just being authentic. This is who I am. So if you can't handle my authenticity, maybe you don't belong here. Well, first, here's what's insane about that thinking. That guy actually thinks he's being a strong leader. But let me tell you what's really happening. His brand of authenticity is costing his company millions because his best people are updating their LinkedIn profiles and his clients are getting frustrated because his team is too scared to bring up problems. And all the innovation is grinding to a halt because nobody wants to risk being humiliated for having a dumb idea. And here's the worst part. He doesn't have a clue. He thinks that people leave the organization because they're weak or because they're not a good culture fit. He never connects the dots between his behavior and their exodus. I'm working with an EVP right now, and we'll call him Ron. Ron works at a fintech company. He's a high performer. He brings in millions of revenue every year. And he's got a mind for things that I can't possibly comprehend. But his CEO pulled him aside 8 months ago and said, Ron, you need to work with someone because people are afraid of you. And Ron, he was baffled. He was like, people are afraid of me? What are you talking about? I'm not mean. I'm just passionate. I'm just passionate. How many times have you heard that? So I was brought in and I started shadowing Ron. And within the first week, I saw him tell one person that their idea was the stupidest thing he'd ever heard in front of his entire team. I also watched him raise his voice at a project manager who missed a deadline, and he claimed that he was just being passionate about excellence. That's why he was yelling. He said, I'm not yelling, I'm just passionate. And then I watched him roll his eyes so hard when he thought a question someone asked was obvious. But again, here's the thing. Ron didn't think he was doing anything wrong. He grew up with role models who led exactly the same way. He had a military father who was incredibly stern. His high school coaches, they all thought that yelling was motivation. And at the beginning of his career, he had bosses who called themselves alpha males. And listen, don't worry, I'm going to do a whole episode on the absolute absurdity of the concept of the alpha male. But here's what Ron didn't understand. Those excuses like these were my role models, they don't work anymore. I didn't have good role models. That doesn't fly anymore. It doesn't fly in 2025 because we have unlimited access to growth opportunities. Oh, your dad wasn't a good dad, so you're not a good dad? Or your boss used to yell at you, so you yell at people? Or you never experienced empathy, so you don't know how to display empathy? I'm sorry. We've got books. We've got podcasts. There's coaches. There's therapy. There's courses you could take. Everything you need to become a better leader and a better person is literally at your fingertips on the device that you are listening to this podcast on right now. You see, the real reason that people don't grow is not a lack of resources. It's fear. It's fear of being vulnerable. It's fear of admitting that they might be wrong about something. And it's fear of changing what's already worked. Fear of not being good at something. And then so many others. But here's the irony. The thing that they're afraid of losing, their power, their respect, maybe even their results, that's exactly what their behavior is destroying. Because authentic leadership isn't about being yourself without any filters. It's about being the best version of yourself in service of others. So let me destroy 3 myths that are ruining leadership right now. Myth number 1, a powerful leader must always be blunt and should be brutally honest. I mean, this is everywhere. Leaders who think that sugarcoating is weakness, that the only way to show strength is to tell it like it is with no filter. But here's what the research actually shows. When someone perceives hostility, their amygdala hijacks their prefrontal cortex. So they stop thinking and they start defending. So that brilliant feedback that you're giving so passionately, well, it might as well be static because all they're hearing is noise. Now, I watched Ron deliver what he thought was helpful feedback to one of his top performers. He said, man, this work is honestly below your capabilities, and I expect so much better from you. Now, that person was one of their best analysts, and I happen to know that she started looking for a new job that week. And it's not because the feedback was wrong. There was a seed of truth to that feedback, but his delivery and word choice made him feel worthless in front of her peers. You see, true power isn't in dropping truth bombs. It's in delivering truth in a way that people can actually hear it so that they can process it and then they can act on it. Here's myth number 2. A powerful leader must win every argument. So this is the leader who dominates every room. They outtalk everyone, they never back down, and they think that yielding is weakness. But here's what this creates. It creates a culture of silence. People stop offering ideas because they know that they're going to get steamrolled. That leader wins every battle, but they lose the war. So there's no more innovation. There's no more buy-in. There's no more growth. The most powerful leaders that I work with, they know when to yield. They change their minds when new information proves them wrong, and then they create space for others to contribute. Because real power isn't about being right. It's about getting the right outcome. Myth number 3. A powerful leader must confront problems loudly and immediately. Now, this is the leader who storms into every problem like it's a Force 5 hurricane. Something goes wrong? Time to call it out publicly. You got to make an example. Show everyone who's boss. But public confrontation doesn't solve problems. It creates new ones. People start hiding mistakes and innovation dies because nobody wants to risk being the next example. Effective leaders, they address problems with precision, not with theatrics, because they know the difference between urgency and impulsiveness. Their power shows up in private, calm, constructive conversations that will actually solve problems instead of just making the leader feel better. So let's talk about radical candor just for a minute. Look, Kim Scott's framework, it sounds great in theory. Care personally while challenging directly. But you see, in practice, it tends to become permission for brutal honesty with a business school stamp of approval. And I see leaders everywhere using radical candor as a get out of jail free card. Hey, man, I'm just being radically candid, you know? And they do that right before they absolutely destroy somebody. They take the challenge directly part, but then they somehow conveniently forget the care personally part. They think showing up with a machete is the same thing as showing up with a scalpel. But here's what nobody talks about. Radical candor without emotional intelligence, it's just aggression with better branding. And it's creating this bizarre workshop or workplace dynamic where people think that they have to choose between being nice or being effective, between kindness or results. But that's a false choice. Again, the best leaders I know, the ones who are getting the best results, they figure out how to be both direct and decent, both honest and human. Because here's the truth. Your delivery determines whether your message builds people up or if it tears them down. And most people who feel built up perform better than people who feel turned down. Almost every single time. So let me give you some numbers that should terrify you. Organizations with poor communications, those soft skills that people don't think are important, well, they're 50% more likely to have higher turnover. So think about how much it costs you to replace a high performer. Teams with hostile managers see productivity drop by an average of 32%. What would happen to your bottom line if your productivity dropped by 32%? And then companies with low psychological safety report 67% fewer breakthrough innovations. But let me make this real for you. Remember Ron, my guy? Well, in the 6 months before we started working together, his department lost $4 key people, not to competitors offering more money. They lost them to competitors who had a better culture. And 3 of their major clients stayed on board, but they specifically requested to work with somebody else because the communication challenges that they had with Ron. Now, Ron made a lot of money for the company, and so they wanted to keep him, but a lot of people were afraid of him because they would rather miss a deadline than get humiliated in front of their teams. But here's the kicker. Ron's passionate leadership style that he thought was driving results was actually costing the money more in lost productivity than they gained by his productivity. But Ron didn't see any of it because in his mind, he was being a strong leader. And the people who were leaving, well, they were just too sensitive or they just weren't a good fit. It wasn't until his CEO mandated coaching that Ron started to see the connection between his communication style and the chaos that was going on around him. And that's when everything changed. Here's what happened when Ron finally started to get it. Now, the hardest part wasn't teaching him new techniques because, again, Ron was a really smart guy. He meant well. The hardest part was getting him to see and accept his behavior. Because when you've been successful doing something one way, admitting that that way might be broken feels like admitting that you were broken. So Ron had a hard time just acknowledging that he might be the problem. But once he saw the actual cost of his communication style, not just the numbers, but also the human cost, he started to embrace the change. So we started with something very simple. We started with an intention check. So before every difficult conversation, Ron learned to ask himself a very simple question. Am I trying to help this person? Or am I trying to hurt them? Now, that sounds like a simple question to answer. I mean, like, how many times are you actively trying to hurt someone? But here's something most people don't think about. And Ron certainly wasn't, because he knew he wasn't trying to hurt people. He was just unconscious of the impact he was having. You see, our brains can confuse intimidation with motivation. They can confuse brutality with strength. So when Ron asked himself that question, he said, wait, I'm trying to intimidate them. I'm trying to be brutal. So I'm trying to hurt them. So we created a test. One of his analysts made a pretty significant error in a client presentation. Now, old Ron would have torn her apart in front of the whole team, maybe even in front of the client. But the new Ron, or let me say the real Ron, he asked to speak to her privately. And in that meeting, he said something along the lines of, help me understand what happened here so we can make sure it doesn't happen again. So it was the same issue, but a completely different energy. So instead of defensiveness, he got honest information about a system gap in their quality control process that he had no idea about. He wasn't aware of it. So instead of humiliation, he got a solution. Now, 6 months later, his team has retained everyone. No one's left. His clients haven't asked to work with other people. And his team is bringing him problems before they become disasters because now they're starting to trust him. They're starting to trust him to help them and not to hurt them. And I'll tell you something. He emailed me just the other day. And let me get this because I wrote it down. He said, Jason, I used to think that vulnerability was weakness. But now I realize that it was my armor that was making me weak. Think about that. What armor did you need at one point in your life that's no longer serving you? So let me tell you about the conversation that changed all this for me. Y'all know Grace, my wife. I talk about her all the time. A little while ago, we were having one of those arguments. You know, the kind when you're not even sure what you're fighting about anymore, but suddenly every grievance you've ever had is on the table and is fair game. Well, I was in full debate mode. I was building my case, I was presenting my evidence, and I was going for the win. And I dropped this perfectly crafted argument about why I was right and she was wrong. Well, Grace looks at me and she says, you know, Jason, you're not wrong. But you know what you are? You're being very mean to me right. That just stopped me. It stopped me cold. I mean, I was dead because I didn't think I was being mean. I just thought I was being passionate. But she was right. I wasn't wrong about the facts, but that doesn't matter. I was completely wrong about the way I was delivering those facts to somebody who means the world to me. And then a little later, she said something that had an even bigger effect on me. She said, Jay, you can be right and still be wrong if the way you say these things makes me feel terrible. You see, communication's not just about getting your point across. It's more about getting your point received. And listen, we all slip up. I mean, I teach this stuff and I still slip up. We all get caught up in the moment. We say things poorly. We get over emotional. But the key is you got to learn from those moments and grow from them instead of just making excuses as to why you do it. And because I didn't have good role models or this is just who I am, those aren't excuses anymore. They're not explanations. They're cop-outs. Because like I said earlier, the abundance of growth opportunities means the real barrier isn't resources. It's fear. And you got to figure out, what are you afraid of? Why are you afraid of changes? What's the underlying fear that prevents you or the person who's talking to you that way from growing? Because you've got to be careful about what your current behavior might be destroying. So at this point, you're probably asking yourself, okay, great. How do I do this? How do you be clear without being cruel? Well, I'm going to give you 3 principles that might change some things for you. The first one is, I want you to think about partnership and not domination. So stop thinking of difficult conversations as you versus them, because they're not. You can start thinking of them as both of you versus the problem. So instead of, oh my God, that presentation was terrible, you could try, this presentation had good bones, but let's figure out how we can make this stronger together. How's that sound? And instead of saying something like, why are you always missing deadlines? You could try, I'm noticing some deadline changes here. Is something getting in your way? What's there? How can we solve this? You see, it's the same issue, but it's a completely different energy. The first versions, those create defensiveness, but the second ones create collaboration. And I know I make it sound easy, but it is hard. It's really hard. But if it's worth doing, if it's worth the outcomes, isn't it worth doing something hard? Now, the second principle is precision, not volume. Look, loud doesn't mean powerful, and public doesn't mean effective. The most powerful leaders I know deliver difficult messages with surgical precision. They're clear, they're specific, and they're focused on behavior, not character. So instead of, hey, you're being really defensive, you could try, I'm noticing that you're having a little bit of resistance to this feedback. So help me understand your perspective. And instead of saying this is absolutely unacceptable, you could try, this isn't meeting our established standards yet. So let's talk about how we can get it there. It's like, I know, right? I mean, how are you going to do that in the morning? How are you going to do that in the moment? Practice the same way you learned how to walk. Now, the third is strategic silence. After you deliver a difficult message, I want you to do one thing for me. Shut up. Just let it land. Give the other person space to process. You see, a lot of leaders just keep talking and talking and talking because silence feels uncomfortable. But you see, silence gives weight to your words. shows you have confidence, and it creates space for thinking instead of just reacting. Now, these principles aren't tricks. This is about fundamentally changing the way you think about powerful leadership. Because real power isn't making people fear you, it's making people trust you. And real strength isn't about breaking people down, it's about building them up. And real leadership, it's not about being right. It's about getting the right results through the right people using the right approach in that moment. So think about the leader that you want to be remembered as. And if you're not a leader, think about the person, the human that you want to be remembered as. Not the person who got results through fear. Not the leader who was authentic at the expense of everyone else around them. And certainly not the human who confused volume with power. You want to be remembered as the leader who figured out how to tell the truth with love. The person who challenged people to grow without crushing their spirits. The human who's direct without being destructive. You could be the person whose people didn't just perform, they thrived. Who didn't just deliver results, you developed other people. You didn't just build a business, you built human beings. Because every conversation you have this week is either building someone up or it's tearing them down. Every piece of feedback is either inspiring growth or creating fear. And every difficult moment is either strengthening trust or it's helping to destroy it. And the world needs more people who can be clear without being cruel, who can be honest without being brutal, and who can be powerful without being destructive. Your people, your family, your friends, they're waiting for you to embrace this, and your organization is depending on it. Your legacy is being written by how you choose to communicate in the moments that matter the most. So choose to be the person who proves that clarity and kindness aren't opposites, they're partners. Choose to be the leader who shows that you can tell the truth and still be trusted. Choose to be the human that you can build people up and not tear them down, because that's what real power looks like. Now, before you go, I want to leave you with this. The last email that Ron sent me had more to it. I mean, he's still a little rough around the edges, but he means well. He said, Jason, my team just had the best quarter we've ever had. But more importantly, people are excited to come to work now. And I never thought that I could be direct and decent. It never occurred to me. And it turns out that that's one of the best ways to be effective. Thanks for helping me out. I mean, that's what's possible when you get this right. Not just better results, but I mean, you will get those too, but actual joy in leadership, actual connection with your people, and actual pride in how you show up. Now, again, this isn't easy. It's really, really hard. And if you want help, if you want support, and how you can figure this out, reach out to me. You can always find me at jasonweissconsulting.com. Shoot me a message and I'm happy to talk to you. And as always, share this episode with someone who might need to hear it. And you can go ahead and tag me and use the hashtag #makingbusinesspersonal by spreading this. And as I've been saying, hit that like and subscribe button and leave a comment. It helps so much. Look, I don't understand algorithms. I can't even spell algorithm. But apparently, those are the 3 things you need. So, look, if you take away anything from this episode, remember this. You can be clear without being cruel. You can be honest without being brutal. And you can be honest without being destructive. The only question is, will you? Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time on Making Business Personal. Bye for now.